You know that feeling, right? Staring at a to-do list, you totally get why you need to do it.
Mm.
Maybe there's even like a tiny spark of wanting to, but actually starting.
hmm
Ugh.
It feels like wading through treacle.
Yeah, exactly. And look, most of us probably get the difference intellectually between wanting to feel like doing something and just, getting on with it.
Right. Motivation versus discipline.
But consistently choosing discipline, actually
Yeah.
doing it when you don't feel like it, that's the real puzzle, isn't it?
It absolutely is. We
Yeah.
often hear that, constant motivation is the secret sauce.
Yeah.
But the reality, well, the reality we all live is that motivation, it comes and goes. Understand how to push through those dips. That's crucial.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We want to explore this interplay, this relationship between motivation, discipline, and this really powerful idea called grit.
Sounds good.
Our mission, basically, is to pull out some genuinely useful, maybe even surprising insights,
Yeah.
things you can actually use to keep moving towards those bigger goals.
Especially when that initial buzz, that enthusiasm has, well, long gone.
Precisely. And we've got a really interesting mix of sources to help us unpack all this.
Yeah, it looks like a great set. We've got a conversation with Professor Carol Dweck all about the power of a growth mindset.
Right. Her work is fascinating.
Then there's a research paper, a real deep dive, called Grit, Perseverance, and Passion for Long-Term Goals.
Okay.
And, maybe surprisingly, some really insightful stuff from a Reddit thread on productivity.
Oh, interesting. Like real world struggles and solutions.
Exactly, a ground-level view.
Yeah.
So, yeah, different perspectives, but they all kind of shed light on how we actually make progress.
Okay, perfect. So let's start right there with that basic distinction. Motivation versus discipline. The Reddit thread had some pretty clear takes on this.
He did. Simple but effective. The gist was motivation is that initial want, that feeling that gets you off the couch.
The spark.
Yeah, the spark. Discipline, though, that's different. That's the inner strength, maybe.
Yeah.
The thing that keeps you going even when the want just isn't there.
It's about doing what you said you'd do.
Right. Aligning your actions with your goals no matter how you're feeling in that moment.
Yeah, that definitely hits home for anyone who's ever hit snooze instead of, getting up for that run they planned.
We've all been there.
And the Reddit thread offered a really key idea here, I thought. Maybe we rely too much on that feeling, that motivation, which is, let's face it, pretty unreliable.
Right. It's fickle.
And maybe we
Okay.
should focus more on just building consistent, small actions.
Yeah, that shift is fascinating. Moving away from waiting for some internal feeling, which you can't really control,
Right.
towards things you can't control. Tangible behaviors. Someone on Reddit shared a great little story about starting a workout habit.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't always feel like doing it, obviously, but they made this simple rule. No shower until the workout was done.
Simple, but effective.
Exactly. It wasn't about finding massive willpower every single morning. It was just setting up this small, almost automatic trigger that kind of nudged them in the right direction.
I love that. It's less about this epic internal struggle
Yeah.
and more about just tweaking your environment, your routines, so the thing you want to do becomes the easier option, or at least harder to avoid.
It connects perfectly to that other point from Reddit, the one referencing James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Ah, yes, the systems idea.
Exactly. Focus on building systems, not just staring at the end goal.
Makes sense. A huge goal, like write a novel, feels impossible when you're not motivated.
Totally overwhelming. But a system, like, say, committing to write for just 30 minutes every single morning before you even look at email.
That feels doable, manageable.
Right. It's about the process, the consistency. Those small actions just add up. And then they also talked about automatic behaviors on Reddit.
Like habits.
Yeah, basically.
Hmm.
Things you do almost on autopilot, needing hardly any effort or desire. That's kind of the goal, isn't it? Making those positive actions just automatic.
Absolutely. So, takeaway number one seems to be stop waiting for inspiration to strike.
Right. Be proactive.
Build those small, consistent systems. Okay, now let's bring in Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. How does believing we can actually help build that discipline?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Dweck's whole idea is that a growth mindset, believing your basic abilities, your intelligence, can be developed through hard work and dedication.
As opposed to being fixed, set in stone.
Exactly, the opposite of a fixed mindset. That core belief fundamentally changes how you deal with challenges.
How so?
Well, Druck points out that a growth mindset kind of dismantles this rigid hierarchy of who's naturally good at something and who isn't.
Right. It's not predetermined.
It opens you up to learning from absolutely everyone, regardless of their job title or perceived talent. Like leaders with a growth mindset, they're more likely to ask questions, seek out different views, not just act like they have all the answers.
Okay, I see that. But how does that belief directly fuel, like, the discipline to keep going?
Okay, so a really key part of a growth mindset is being willing to embrace struggle, to lean into the discomfort when you're learning something tricky.
Which is often when discipline is most needed.
Precisely. If you have a fixed mindset, hitting a wall is super discouraging. It feels like proof you just don't have it.
See? I knew I wasn't good at this.
Exactly that thought. But with a growth mindset, those same challenges, they become opportunities. They're seen as necessary steps for development.
Ah, so it reframes the struggle.
Completely. So the need for discipline isn't just about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself through something awful. It becomes more about intentionally engaging with that difficulty because you believe it's actually making you better.
That makes a lot of sense. It changes the why behind the effort. Discipline isn't just willpower, it's strategic engagement with challenges because you trust the growth process.
You got it. And Dweck also linked growth mindset to something she called a lean mindset.
Okay, what's the connection there?
She suggested that growth mindset is basically the psychological bedrock for a lean mindset, which is all about continuous improvement.
Right, like in manufacturing, always getting better.
Yeah, similar principles. And a huge part of that is being willing, even eager, to get feedback, even critical feedback,
Which can be hard to hear.
especially with a fixed mindset. If you think ability is fixed, mistakes or problems feel like personal indictments. Like, I failed.
But with a growth mindset.
You see that bad news or that mistake, not as a reflection of your fixed ability, but as super valuable data. Information you absolutely need to learn, solve the problem, and improve. It encourages that vulnerability.
And Drek also stressed this isn't just an individual thing, right? Organizations need a growth mindset culture.
Oh, absolutely crucial. You could have a strong personal growth mindset,
Right.
but if you're in an environment that punishes mistakes or demands everyone pretend they're perfect,
It's going to be really hard to actually live it out.
exactly. A real growth mindset culture has to be built into the way things are done, the policies, the practices. It means creating a space where taking calculated risks is okay, where learning from failure is actually valued.
Where people feel safe enough to say, hey, I'm struggling with this.
Yes, and collaborate to find solutions. DeWalk told this story about a tech team that consciously decided to struggle together. They were open about challenges, shared what was working, what wasn't. It fostered collective growth, not just individual pressure.
That sounds so much healthier and probably more effective in the long run.
Definitely more sustainable.
Okay, so growth mindset gives us that fundamental belief that we can improve, which makes the discipline needed to push through feel like a worthwhile investment. Okay, now let's bring in grit, this concept from that research paper. How does grit build on all this?
Right, so grit. The paper defines it specifically as perseverance and passion for long-term goals.
Perseverance and passion, both are key.
Both. And what's really striking is the research found grit to be this incredibly strong predictor of success in all sorts of demanding situations.
Like what?
Well, often outperforming things we usually think are most important, like IQ or even conscientiousness.
Yeah.
They look at academic stuff like GPAs at really tough universities,
Okay.
resilience in super challenging places, like the first summer training at West Point.
Wow, yeah, that's notoriously tough.
Right. And even competitive things like how far kids got in the National Spelling Bee.
Huh. That's a really diverse range of areas. So what were some of the standout findings?
Well, first, the paper actually connects back to older research, like over a century ago, people like Galton and Cox.
Names from the history books.
Yeah, they'd already noticed that truly exceptional achievement wasn't just about raw talent. They talked about persistence, dedication, sheer hard work over time.
The grit isn't a brand new idea necessarily.
Not entirely. But this study really formalized it, created a way to measure it with their grit scale, and they broke grit down into two main parts.
Which?
First, consistency of interests. Basically, sticking with your main goals over the long haul, not constantly chopping and changing.
Okay, staying focused.
And second, perseverance of effort,
Hmm.
which is pretty much what it sounds like, pushing through setbacks, obstacles, not giving up easily.
Makes sense. Consistency and perseverance. Did the study look at how grit relates to things like education or age?
Yes, they did. Figure 1 in the paper looked at grit scores versus how much education people had, controlling for age.
And what did they find?
A pretty clear trend. Generally, more education meant higher grit scores. Interestingly, people with associate's degrees actually scored notably higher in grit than those with just some college, and maybe even slightly higher, though not statistically significant, than those with bachelor's degrees.
Huh. That is interesting. What might that suggest?
Well, one thought is that maybe the process of getting through higher education itself helps build grit.
Hmm.
Sticking with it, overcoming the challenges involved, it might actually cultivate that perseverance.
So education doesn't just give you knowledge, it might also build this character trait.
Plausibly, yeah. It's an interesting angle.
What about age? Does grit change as we get older?
Figure 2 looked at that, controlling for education this time. They found a general tendency for grit to increase with age.
We get grittier as we get older.
Seems like it, though the jumps between adjacent age groups weren't always statistically significant. The researchers speculated maybe we just learned from experience that flitting between goals isn't very effective long term.
Or maybe life just throws more challenges at you that force you to develop it.
Could be that too. They acknowledge other personality factors and life experiences likely play a role.
And they also compared grit to other personality traits, like the big five, right?
Absolutely. They found, not surprisingly, a strong positive link between grit and conscientiousness. Both involve being organized, responsible, sticking to tasks.
Makes sense.
But here's the crucial bit. Even when they statistically removed the effect of the big five traits, including conscientiousness, grit still independently predicted both educational attainment and age.
So grit isn't just conscientiousness by another name.
Exactly. Figures 3 and 4 in the paper show this. Grit seems to capture something unique about that sustained passion and effort for the long haul, beyond just being generally responsible or diligent.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Grit offers something extra. What other cool findings came out?
Well, people with higher grit scores reported making fewer career changes. Suggests more commitment.
Yeah, consistency again.
And in their study on Ivy League undergrads, super smart kids, already grit was linked to higher GPAs.
Even among the brightest.
Get this, even when there was a slight negative correlation with their SAT scores.
Wait, what? Higher grit, slightly lower SATs, but better grades.
That's what it suggests. It points to the idea that even in these elite environments, grit might help some students really succeed. Perhaps even compensating for slightly lower, standardized test scores through sheer hard work and persistence.
Wow, that is powerful. That effort and passion can potentially matter more than just initial aptitude.
It really is.
Mm.
And the West Point findings were maybe even more dramatic.
What happened there?
They found grit was a better predictor of whether cadets would make it through that brutal first summer training known as Beast Barracks.
Right. Huge dropout rate.
Better than the cadets' self-control scores, and even better than the Academy's own complex admission score, which looks at everything: academics, fitness, leadership potential.
Grit beat the admission score. Seriously.
That's what the study found for predicting completion of that initial training period.
Mhm.
And finally, the spelling bee study.
Right, the spellers.
Grittier finalists tended to go further in the competition. And their analysis, shown in figures 5 and 6, suggested this was partly because they just spent more time studying and practicing and had built up more prior experience. The effort paid off.
Okay, so across the board, academics, military training, competitive spelling, this quality of grit just keeps showing up as incredibly important for long-term success.
It really does seem to be a key ingredient.
So now the million-dollar question for everyone listening. How do you actually get more discipline, more grit? If it's so important, how do we cultivate it?
Yeah, the practical side. Well, we've already got that foundation from the Reddit discussion, build systems.
Right, make it easier to be disciplined.
That's fundamental, make the actions more habitual. And the AFA education blog post we looked at also had some really concrete strategies for boosting self-motivation, which ties right into building discipline and grit.
Okay, what were some of their main tips?
They really emphasize, first, understanding your own intrinsic drivers, like what genuinely motivates you deep down, focusing on that internal satisfaction.
Knowing your why.
Exactly. Also, setting SMART goals specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and crucially, breaking big goals down into smaller, manageable steps.
Avoids overwhelm. Keeps momentum.
Right. They also mentioned creating a supportive environment, having positive daily routines including self-care and tackling procrastination head-on. but starting really small.
Yeah.
Just commit to 5 minutes. And also this interesting idea, act as if you're motivated, even when you're not.
Fake it till you make it.
Kind of. That initial action can sometimes actually generate the feeling that was missing. And finally, track your progress and reward yourself for hitting milestones. Reinforce the behavior.
That act as if idea is interesting. It's like just starting the motion can get the engine going.
Exactly. Someone on Reddit mentioned Mark Manson's idea action can actually precede motivation or even inspire it. Don't wait for the feeling, just act.
And that connects to the compound interest of self-improvement idea from the Economic Times article too, right?
Beautifully. It highlights the power of grit perfectly. Small, consistent efforts just getting 1% better each day. Metaphorically speaking, they really compound over time into huge gains. That is grit in action. Perseverance with passion, accumulating results.
And that other Reddit comment really stuck with me too. The effort you exert when no one is watching is in direct correlation to the results you will breed when everyone is watching.
Oof, yeah, that hits hard. It speaks right to that deep internal commitment.
The unseen work.
Those moments of discipline when nobody's cheering you on, nobody would know if you skipped it,
Mm-hmm.
those are the moments that build future success. And Professor Dweck's advice for leaders about sharing struggles,
Right, be vulnerable.
that applies personally too. Creating an internal environment or telling yourself it's okay not to be perfect, it's okay to struggle, that's vital for fostering the resilience to keep going. And circling back, that AFA blog reminder, always remember your why.
Connect to the deeper purpose.
It fuels commitment when things get tough.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. What we've seen is, look, motivation is great when it shows up, but it's unreliable, a fleeting spark.
Totally.
Real progress, hitting those long-term goals, that seems to depend much more on discipline, doing the work, even when you don't feel like it.
And crucially, discipline isn't just about grim determination. We can actively build it.
Through conscious systems, consistent small actions, making it easier to do the right thing.
And having a growth mindset provides that essential belief, the faith that the effort will lead to improvement, making the discipline feel worthwhile.
It gives the struggle meaning.
Exactly. And then grit, that blend of perseverance and passion, emerges as this incredibly powerful predictor of success in so many challenging areas, sometimes even more so than raw talent.
It complements talent, or maybe even makes up for a lack of it sometimes.
It seems that way. And I really love that message from Professor Dweck we keep coming back to. Step into the person you want to be and be okay that that's not the person you're at right now.
Yeah, that's so good. It captures the whole journey, doesn't it?
It really does. Building discipline, building grit, it is a journey. It means accepting struggle as part of it, knowing growth isn't always smooth sailing. Who you are today is just one point along the way.
Not the final destination.
Not at all.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, drawing all this together, thinking about your own goals. What's one small, consistent action you could start doing, like today, to build a system that supports one of them?
Just one small thing.
And maybe how can you consciously start reframing those inevitable setbacks or challenges, not as proof you can't do it, but as opportunities to learn, to grow, to strengthen that resilience muscle, your grit.
Yeah, what's that deep why that's driving you? Keep that front and center.
Definitely. Maybe digging into related ideas like self-efficacy, that belief in your own ability to handle specific tasks, or learning more about habit formation science could be interesting next steps too.